Hey, Planet Philanthropy. My name is Eric Kratom. I'm the head of digital strategy at Bigwidesky. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there with you all this year. I really wish that I could, especially after the year and a half that we've all been through. But I hope that this session is interesting to you, and hopefully I can join you in the future. Today, I'm talking about the State of Nonprofit Digital Giving study that Bigwidesky released in December of 2020. This was our second year doing this study, and we released it at the end of the year in December, as I said. So by the time you see this, it will be 5-6 months old. But unlike a lot of studies that come out, anywhere from March, June to October, we do this at the end of the year so that we get as much data as we possibly can for you. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping, if you would like the 2020 study, you can get it here at this link. And if I'm moving too quickly, hopefully you can just hit pause and grab the link. If you would like the 2019 study, you can get that here. And then if you would like to see the webinar in which we released our 2019 study, because I will reference it now and then you can watch that here. As I mentioned, my name is Eric Kratom. I'm the head of digital strategy at Bigwidesky. I've worked on the agency side of nonprofits for a little over 10 years. I ran digital at the largest fundraising agency in the world, and then I ran digital media at another large fundraising agency, and then working at Bigwidesky, about 70-80% of our clients are nonprofits, but we work across programs, development, brand. We do a number of things. And then prior to all of this, I spent 7 years working with Fortune 100 organizations, primarily in new digital projects. So what at the time was new social media, new digital analytics, and so on. Before we go too far into this, let's talk about the state of the industry so that we can set ourselves or sort of level set for the context and for the data that we're going to be seeing. If we look at the Association of Fundraising Professionals Fundraising Effectiveness Project at their data through the end of Q4 2020, we saw that donors for the year were up 7.3%, and also that donations were up 10.6%. I heard from a lot of nonprofits that their year was strong, whether their donors were up 1% or they were up 25%, and their donations were up 5% or 100%. And so what I heard was a lot of nonprofits feeling confident. Unfortunately, I am concerned about these numbers because going along with the number of donors being up and the number of donations being up was a concerning trend that, according to AFP, the number of retained donors industry-wide was down 4.1%, and the number of new retained donors was down 11.6%. So what this says to me and what this leads me to believe or to be concerned about is that last year, the people who could afford to give, gave. Especially with all of the suffering that we saw on the news and from our friends and family, people being out of work or just being sick or whatever else was going on. There were a lot of people who did feel generous. Unfortunately, though, we saw a lot of nonprofits were not able to effectively retain donors. And so I'm concerned that a lot of nonprofits sort of rose the rising tide last year, but may not have put the strategies in place in order to ensure that they keep all of those new donors in 2021 and on into 2022. So rather than seeing your revenue and your number of donors climb and then just continue to climb, or at least flatten out at the very least, what I think is going to happen this year is a lot of organizations that are not reinvesting in their communications, in their donor base, in their branding, in their direct response, will actually see a spike in 2020 and then a significant drop-off, which will then make it very hard, not just to, of course, employ the people that you employ, but perhaps even more so, it will be difficult to deliver the programs and services. So whether you're feeding the homeless, whether you're helping animals, whatever it is that you're doing, you may have had a lot of funds in 2020 and then coming into 2021, but if you're not able to retain that, it's going to be hard to continue to deliver deliver upon the reason that you exist. And hopefully what you see here and what you learn at Planet Philanthropy will help to stave that off for your organization. We look at the study, some of the background and the methodology. So we pick at random 100 organizations. We attempt 100 online donations. When we can, we opt into 100 email programs. We follow those organizations in social media when we can find them. And then if texting, calling, or mobile programs of any kind are available, we opt into those as well. We use Charity Navigator's classifications for the organizations. And so we ended up with 9 organizations that worked with animals, 8 organizations that were arts, culture, or humanities, 2 that were in community development, and on around the circle here. The largest single set of organizations was human services, which if you work with human services, you know that that's a pretty broad category. There are faith-based organizations, there are homeless shelters, there are any number of things that fit in that category. But like I said, we use Charity Navigator's classifications so that hopefully we're not making categories that are too broad or too narrow. We're trying to stick with things that are more or less industry standard. And then you can see the second largest group here is healthcare with 15 organizations and education with 10. By revenue, we had 8 organizations that had less than $1 million in annual revenue, 44 organizations that were between $1 million and $5 million. We had 24 organizations that were between $5 million and $10 million and on up around there. The largest organization that we had has between $500 million and $1 billion in annual revenue. And if I recall correctly, in 2019, I think we had 1 or maybe 2 organizations that had over $1 billion in annual revenue. So, you know, it's a little different mix this year, but it's a random selection. And hopefully, as we go through some of these numbers, where there are correlations that I reference or anything else, hopefully that'll give you some something to compare yourself against. We analyzed 785 emails, 62 direct mail pieces, 3 phone calls, 3 text messages, and then, of course, hundreds of social media updates. And considering that this study lasted for approximately 3 months, and we received 785 emails, 62 direct mail pieces, and so on, in the approximately 5 months since the study has ended, we now have received a total of 5,000 emails. And then even in 2019, we had analyzed those emails and delivered our study. But what we did subsequently is that we produced some analyses on all of the additional data that we got later on, and I'll reference later on in the presentation where you can see some of that. But hopefully, if any of this is of interest to you, you will reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you'll follow Bigwidesky in social media, sign up for email or whatever else. Because we do continue to receive so much information, the direct mail pieces, the email, the social media, and so we will provide additional analyses, whether it's through articles or whatever else in the future. So if you're interested in that, then please do find me or find Bigwidesky and go ahead and follow us. One thing that was new that we added this year was a lot of website and social media data. So we analyzed almost 575,000 web pages across these 100 nonprofits, 109,000 images, almost 13,000 PDFs, and then over 18 billion links pointing to those nonprofits. We had so much data specifically around the links that it took weeks to process all of that data. And we still, at this time, are processing the data, trying to get it to a place where we could deliver to you some analyses that help you to learn about what types of things should you be doing with your website for search engine optimization, choosing keywords, placing images on your website, and so on. So as I said, if any of this interests you, please do follow Bigwidesky or find me, or my email address is on many of these slides. Shoot me a line, and as we have additional information, we will share that, of course. Looking at the experience overall, if you're familiar with the 2019 study, then you probably will, know this already. But unfortunately, one of the most consistent things that we encountered was that a lot of nonprofits just do not make it easy to accomplish what the visitor would like to accomplish when they visit the website. So if you are someone who's looking for information, if you're looking to make a donation or whatever else, unfortunately, you can come away from that just feeling overall frustrated. It's a lot of this has to do really with the user experience, but we'll talk about some of that going forward. One of the other things that is sort of relevant to our experience overall is that there are a lot of simple things that are very checklist-like that many nonprofits are not doing. There are a lot of things that you don't have to have, some great strategic experience or some visionary mind in order to know these things or to do these things. It's more about knowing what the best practices are, or simply sitting back and thinking about, if I were the donor, if I were someone looking for help, if I were an audience member X, Y, or Z, what is it that I would need to see, or what is it that would need to be put in place in order for me to accomplish my goals? And a lot of these things really are best practices. They sort of are checklist-like. Unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits are really not following many best practices. And as a result, it's leading to that frustration that I mentioned before. As far as both email and the direct mail experience goes, it was largely underwhelming. And having worked in direct response for nonprofits for almost 10 years. I do understand that there are a lot of those direct mail pieces in particular, but also email pieces that don't look super exciting that still have great returns. There are direct mail pieces that many nonprofits have been mailing for acquisition or whatever it is for 20 years that still have the best ROI. I'm not judging based on the look of the direct mail pieces. Of course, that has an impact, but I'm not judging that as much as what was the experience that we had receiving the direct mail and the email, and did we think that these nonprofits were really making donors feel special? Did we feel like the nonprofits that were in the study were helping the donor or potential donor to move along through the process and become committed to the organization? And largely the answer is no, unfortunately. Finally, as far as the experience goes, both in search and social media, unfortunately, the algorithms, Google's various algorithms for showing search results, Facebook's newsfeed algorithm, and so on, are really geared to show the biggest brands to searchers and to social media users. Because, for example, if you go to Google and you search for watch, Google, as a machine, if I can say that it thinks, the machine basically thinks, do I show this searcher the best possible results for watch or whatever it is that you search for? Or do I show maybe not the best possible result, but maybe one that's not the most optimized or has the most links or whatever, but perhaps I show the search result that is most recognizable? Well, based on a lot of social science and behavioral studies, Google and Facebook and all of these brands have generally found that their users respond the best when they see brands that they recognize. So unfortunately, for most of you nonprofits, when Google has to decide, do I show your website when you have an answer to a searcher's question, or do I show some bigger nonprofit or even for-profit that also has an answer, even though it may not be as good of an answer to the searcher's question, generally, Google's going to default to showing the bigger brand. And sadly, what ends up happening is the small to medium-sized nonprofits really get squeezed out. The same thing is true in the Facebook newsfeed. The same thing is true in Instagram and so on. If you don't have a recognizable brand, it makes it even harder for you to be found. And unfortunately, what that leads to is you just get less people that are being exposed to your brand. You get less exposure to prospects online, and it makes it harder to grow as quickly as those larger organizations because they're getting a bump from the brand recognition and from the algorithms. So the way that we go through these studies, well, one way that we go through these studies is we attempt to put ourselves in the position of a prospective donor. So let's just imagine that you're speaking with a colleague and you tell that colleague that you love animals, and your colleague says, oh, well, if you love animals, then you would really like this organization that does X, Y, or Z for animals. You should check them out. Or you drive into work one day and there's a radiothon on, and somebody describes the nonprofit that is benefiting from that radiothon. And then when you get to work or you get home or wherever it is, you just happen to remember, oh yeah, maybe I should look them up. So we put ourselves in the position of trying to find an organization, and then from there, we walk through the process. So as a result, one of the main places that we start is Google. And some important things to know as far as Google and search go is that more people use search than use anything else online, social media included. And if that's not obvious to you at the moment, then hopefully it will be in a second. When you really think about, you probably know people who don't use social media at all, or they say things like, oh, I don't use Facebook or whatever. But do you know anyone who doesn't use search? Whether they use Bing or Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever it is, more than likely, pretty much everyone out there that you know uses search. This is true for people who are 95 years old, who have, a laptop or a tablet or whatever, and they didn't grow up using computers. And it's true for 13-year-olds who have, their newest iPhone or Android device or whatever it is. Pretty much everyone worldwide uses search, and yet there are people who don't use social media. So search is very important. According to Statista, 95% of mobile search occurs on Google, and also according to Statista, 90% of desktop search occurs on Google. So Google is very important. Almost all search, 9 out of 10 searches in most of these cases here, occur on Google. And according to HubSpot, 75% of searchers never go beyond Google's first page. So not only is Google important, but if you can't get on the first page of Google, then unfortunately, you almost don't exist. And one of the first ways of ranking, one of the most important ways of ranking in Google search results is getting links pointing to your website. Now, not all links are created equal, and I will talk about that here in a second, but in general, the more links that you have pointing to your website, the better. So we took a look at the number of links or backlinks pointing to each nonprofit in our study, and we saw a fairly standard long tail distribution where we have one organization that has over 25,000 backlinks pointing to its website. Then we have several organizations that have around about between 5,000 and 12, 13,000 links pointing to their website. That's what would generally be referred to as the chunky middle. And then this long tail distribution just stretches out to where we have organizations that have barely any links pointing to them. All things being equal, the more links that you have pointing to your website, the better you're going to rank in search results. But not all links are created equal. So typically, you want to get links from higher quality websites, because if you think of websites like you think of a person giving you a recommendation, if you know someone who's highly reliable, that everybody goes to this person and they ask them for advice, then when that person gives you a recommendation, you're gonna have a high level of confidence that you should go and talk to that person or look at this thing or research something or whatever it is. If you know someone that is highly unreliable and they make a recommendation to you, you're probably just going to blow it off. The same thing is true with links. Google and Bing and all of the search engines have their own methods of determining what websites they believe are the most authoritative or the most trustworthy. And generally, the higher quality website, the higher trust, the higher authority website that you get a link from, the more value that it passes to you. So if you think about it in terms of getting one quality recommendation from that person that you trust, or getting 1,000 recommendations from people that are not trustworthy, which one's going to help you out more? Probably one quality recommendation. Unfortunately, when we look at the domain ratings and domain ratings or domain rating, or sometimes domain authority, depending on what tool you're using, what SEO tool you're using, when we look at the domain ratings, almost 50% of the links pointing to nonprofits in our study come from websites in the lowest quality group, with a domain rating of 0 to 10. These are your spammy websites across the internet. These are the ones that when you go to visit them, you can tell that generally that it's just not a good experience. Then you start to see we have 20,000 links in our study from websites with domain ratings between 11 and 20. We have another 20,000 from websites with domain ratings of 21 to 30 and on up around. Basically, as I said, the higher quality website that you can get a link from, the better it's going to benefit you. So if any of you go out and you're interested in search engine optimization, or you're going to be building links, not all links are created equal. And so you want to get links from the highest quality websites that you can. When we looked at the quality of links, backlinks that we found in our study, and annual revenue from organizations in our study, we found that there was a 0.43 correlation between the overall quality or value of links, that domain rating, and the revenue that an organization has. So generally, the higher quality links, the higher domain rating links that your nonprofit is able to acquire, the more revenue you're going to have. There's a 0.43 correlation between quality of links and revenue. Let's take a look at some of the websites that we found in our study. So this particular organization, searchfolder.net, it linked to 28 nonprofits in our study. Dotted-carrier-798.appspot.com linked to 23 nonprofits in our study. Janheat.in, I guess, hopefully I'm pronouncing that appropriately, linked to 22 nonprofits in our study. Healthgolds.com linked to 21 nonprofits in our study. And then also we have findhistoryhere.com, which linked to 20 nonprofits in our study. So all of these websites had a domain rating of 1. That means that these websites are the junkiest websites that you could come across. If you have a domain rating of 100, 99, 98, high numbers like that, you are Facebook, you are Wikipedia, New York Times, other, highly respected websites like that. You get one link from those websites, it's going to give you a big bump in search results. You get 1,000 links from findhistoryhere.com, it's not going to help you at all. And the higher quality links that you get, the greater the revenue is, more than likely, that your organization has annually. We looked at websites that link the most to the most nonprofits. We found, for example, causeIQ.com has a domain rating of 43, so it's not particularly high, but it's not junky, of course. Links to 93 nonprofits out of 100 in our study. Charity Navigator, not too surprising, has a domain rating of 87. That linked to only 91 of 100 nonprofits in our study, interestingly enough. So remember, the higher the quality of the link is, the more of a bump you get. Charity Navigator, pretty much all of us should be on there. So you get a link from there. It's going to give you a bump in search results, and they link to almost everybody. We have some other ones in here that are interesting: sitelinks.info, prlog.ru, and so on. These websites here link to the most. We have idcrawl.com, a little bit, about 2/3 of the way down this list, has a domain rating of 0, and it links to 70 nonprofits. So any of you that might have a link from idcrawl.com, you're getting not too much of a bump. But hey, even Constant Contact, 2 spots above that, has a domain rating of 92. So you get a link from Constant Contact, you're probably going to be getting some help from that, ranking better and being found by prospective donors or people that need help if you do provide programs and services to individuals. And Constant Contact, right there, they link to 70 of the nonprofits in our study. We also looked at the websites that were linking to nonprofits in our study that had the highest domain ratings. YouTube, domain rating of 98. That means it's basically one of the highest quality websites, one of the most authoritative websites on the internet. But it only links to 11 of the nonprofits in our study. LinkedIn, domain rating of 98, only links to 1 of the nonprofits in our study. And on down, you can see generally the highest quality websites don't link to a lot of nonprofits. Now, I'm not going to get too far into it here, but there are things called followed and no followed links. One passes search value, the other one doesn't. So just because you get a link on Google doesn't mean that it's going to pass value. If you have a YouTube channel, then you may have a link on Google, but it might not pass value because it might be a no followed link. The same is true if you have a LinkedIn company page, as they refer to it. You might have a link on LinkedIn, but it might not be passing search value. But so at the moment, we are only looking at followed links here, not no followed links, in case anybody wants to dig deeper into search engine optimization after this presentation. One of the things that was interesting in this study is that one nonprofit that we looked at in AHREFS, the tool that AHREFS, the tool that we used, had a rank of 93,000. Now, an AHREFS rank basically means if you're number 1, you are the highest quality, most authoritative website on the internet. You have a high domain rating. If you are, if you have an AHREFS rank of 1 million or 2 million or whatever it is, that means you're getting further down the list and you are one of the lower quality websites on the internet. Having an AHREFS rank of 93,111 is a very high rank, actually. That means that generally you are going to be doing well in search. This nonprofit also had a URL rating. It's like a domain rating, except it's what's the general quality, average quality of each page on the website. They had a URL rating of 79 and a domain rating of 71. The domain rating of 71 is pretty high. It's not up there with YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever else. But frankly, if you have a domain rating of 71, you're going to be ranking pretty well in search results. You can also see the number of referring pages. This is the number of pages on the internet that are linking to this organization. How they had a drop off at one point and then it bounced back up. More than likely, that drop off, what happened is they probably redesigned their website and deleted a bunch of pages. And if I link to, if you are, anonymousnonprofit.org/about, if that's your about page, if you delete your about page or you change it to about-us and about doesn't exist anymore, my link no longer counts. And a lot of nonprofits, unfortunately, what ends up happening when they redesign their website is that they will delete old pages and they won't ensure that all of those old URLs redirect to new URLs, or at least all of the old URLs that have links pointing to them redirect. And if they don't redirect, then those links no longer count. And so more than likely what happened back in 2014 with this organization, when you see that drop off, is they probably redesigned their website, deleted a bunch of pages, and they lost a bunch of links. They might have figured that out in late 2017 when this graph takes off again. And so that may be why they picked up a whole bunch of links all of a sudden. But then you can see it drops off again in 2019. So what do we think happened here? Well, what ended up happening actually is we found that this organization, what they did was in mid-2019, they had started working on some website redesign work and they deleted a bunch of pages. And then during our study in late 2020, what they did was they changed their website. They changed their domain. So again, if you were anonymousnonprofit.org and you changed to, instead of anonymous, you're anon-nonprofit.org or something of that nature, which a lot of nonprofits do this. What happens is all of those old links, if you do not keep your old domain and redirect the links. So you go from anonymousnonprofit.org/about to anon-nonprofit.org/about. If you don't redirect those old URLs to the new URLs, you lose a lot of value. Well, what this organization did was in mid-2019, they deleted a bunch of pages. They lost a bunch of the links pointing to them, which means they're ranking worse in search results. And then during our study in late 2020, they changed their domain. And unfortunately, despite the fact that they did a bunch of redirects, so they picked up, you see the spike in the lower right, they picked up all of these referring pages pointing to them. Unfortunately, while it gave them a good AHREFS rank, it did not actually help them pick up for any of their pages to rank particularly well, because their URL rating remained down at a 13. But their domain rating is high, which basically means that Google has figured out that, or the search engines have figured out that what the old domain was found for, the new domain should now be found for, but they have no single page on their website that is highly authoritative. My guess is that they probably redirected all of their old links and pages to their homepage on their new website. But basically, without going too much further into this, when you do a website redesign, when you're thinking about SEO, if you're deleting pages on your website, look and see if people are linking to you, and make sure that you handle all of your redirects so that you don't lose that search value. And if anybody tries to talk you into changing your domain name, only do it if it's really crucial that you do it, because this organization, I'll tell you, has a name associated with it that is one of the most famous musicians in the world. This musician has their own nonprofit, and so it's highly recognizable. Unfortunately, when they're redesigning their website and just managing their search engine optimization and all that, they made some decisions that perhaps are going to be good in the long run, but in the short run, how it's impacting them is when people search for appropriate things, they're just not being found as much because they don't rank as well. They don't have as good of URL ratings and so on. Already referenced, according to HubSpot, only 70 or 75% of searchers don't go past the first page. So in the search engine optimization space, a lot of people say the best place to hide a dead body is page 2 of Google search results. So hopefully, if you're interested in search engine optimization, or you do a little bit of looking, you will not make too many simple mistakes like redirects and so on, so that your organization can land on page 1 as much as possible. Because if you're not on page 1, you pretty much don't exist. So we have heard about a nonprofit, we searched for a nonprofit, and now let's imagine we're going to visit their website. Well, a very typical experience for us was to land on a nonprofit's website and then to get some pop-ups. It could be a pop-up, a light box, a modal, whatever you want to call it. Some of you that saw last year's study, you might recall that me personally, I'm not a big fan of these pop-ups, but studies do show that generally they work. When I have tested them with my clients, almost universally, a good pop-up, light box, whatever you want to call it, almost universally, that will beat the alternatives. Whether you're looking for a donation, an email sign-up, or something else, generally a well-designed and well-placed light box will perform well. Unfortunately, when we visited this nonprofit's website, we got 3. Now, this is an organization that works in domestic violence, so I don't want to knock them too hard for the fact that in the upper right, they have the safety alert, how you can, keep your browser history safe and so on. So I understand that. Unfortunately, they layer on top of that a pop-up in the lower right to book a presentation. Then in the lower left, they have this welcome email sign up, and then they're covering just the general experience on the website, and they have something about a shelter graduate, but I can't read it because I have to close at least one of these light boxes or pop-ups, if not all 3. Hopefully, most of you know that when you want someone to do something, it's a lot easier to get them to do it when you ask them to do one thing rather than to pop up 3, 4, 5 things in their face, because people will have a paradox of choice or analysis paralysis, however you want to think about this. And more than likely what's going to happen is that people will not know what to look at. They'll have this sort of unconscious dissatisfaction, and they're going to leave, or at the very least, they're not going to follow through on the action that you want them to take. I don't know if any of you know who this person is, but he's famous for saying the 3 most famous, most well-known words in all of mountaineering. When he was asked, why did you climb Mount Everest? He said, because it's there. Well, this is George Mallory. And unfortunately, no one that you want to take an action is like George Mallory. In fact, human beings are particularly bad at following rules. So when you think back to those light boxes or those pop-ups or just the general website experience, ideally, control as much of what people are looking at as possible. If what you want to show in a pop-up is important, show the one pop-up. And if you can control who you show it to and when you show it so that you're only showing it to the right people, which is not that hard. If you have questions about it, send me an email. If you can control who you're showing things to and when you're showing them, you're going to get an even better response rate and you're going to provide a better experience. If you're not controlling for the user experience, if you're showing to people too many pieces of flair, then they're not like George Mallory. They're not going to click on a button just because it's there. They're not going to sign up for email just because it's there. More than likely, they're just going to get frustrated and leave. We did find in our study that 63% of nonprofits did not have auto-rotating heroes. So if you take a look at this video here on the left, you can see the auto-rotation. 37% of nonprofits did have auto-rotating heroes. So when I've done conversion rate optimization experiments in the past, we have shown a greater than 30% higher click-through rate from the homepage of a nonprofit to subsequent pages on the nonprofit. And we've also shown higher conversion rates, donation conversion rates, and revenue when we used a manually rotating hero section or header or whatever you want to call it here, as compared to an auto-rotator. Generally, what studies have shown, or the reason that studies have shown this to be the case, and our testing has shown that this works, is because when you start flipping things on people, you're forcing them to start looking at new things when you may have put your most important message in the first hero image, or you may have put your most important message in, for example, a pop-up or wherever it is. But right when you're giving them the opportunity to think, do I want to follow through on that? You flip it and you show them the next image and the next image and the next image. Generally, what I would recommend is that if you have an auto-rotating hero and you can control this, is switch your auto-rotating hero to a manual rotating hero and let people click the left and right arrow or swipe or whatever it is. Because, as I referenced, all of the experiments that we have done with nonprofits has shown both a greater click-through rate, significantly higher click-through rate, greater than 30% to subsequent pages on the website, and also higher donation conversion rates and revenue. I do want to stop and call out that according to QGive, 51% of nonprofit website visitors are on mobile. So let's underscore the importance of optimizing for mobile, which is part of the reason that now and then here I will reference mobile, and you'll see this screenshot here. Every experiment that I have run before with nonprofits, and I've done a lot of conversion rate optimization, shows that you have to ask for a donation if you want to get a donation. Shouldn't be too surprising. If you've seen Glenn Ross, or if you've heard any of these, standard sort of sales quips, right? You have to ask for a sale to get a sale, always be closing, things like that. The same is true for a nonprofit. The same is true for whether it's donations or email signups. Unfortunately, only 24% of nonprofits asked for a donation in their hero, and only 22% of nonprofits had an obvious email signup. That's an email signup CTA in a light box, or in the hero on their homepage, or somewhere really obvious. Like just having an email sign-up box in the header or the footer was not enough for us. It had to be something that was really sort of called out or in your face. Now, while only 24% of nonprofits asked for a donation in their hero, when I have done user experience surveys in the past, consistently the one audience for which asking for a donation in the hero does not work well is prospect audiences. When we get feedback from prospects in testing, consistently for years now, what the prospects will tell us is something like, you're asking me to give you money before I know what I'm giving money to. So there are ways to control for showing an ask most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, to control for showing an ask to donors or likely donors versus prospects or people who are looking for just information or looking to get help or whatever else it is. If you're interested in that, shoot me an email, eric@bigwidesky.com. I'm certainly happy to point you in the right direction. If I can, you can control for things like this in free Google Tag Manager and other stuff, or at the very least, you can go and talk to your agency or whoever and see if this is something that you can control for. But going back to the beginning of this slide, every experiment that I have run in the past, even when we haven't controlled for who are we showing the ask to, every experiment where we have put the ask in the donation ask in the homepage hero has had greater conversion rates, and greater revenue for the organization. So I would encourage you generally to ask for money more. Always be closing. Like I said, you have to ask for the sale to get the sale and so on. Now, moving on, let's imagine you visited the nonprofit's website. You decide you're going to give a donation. And so you click on that donate button and then you land on something like this. So whether you're sending someone out to PayPal or Network for Good, or you're keeping them on your website, if somebody wants to give you a donation and they land on a page that's broken or doesn't exist, that's not a great experience. Or like this nonprofit here, you send them to a page that, maybe to some people, maybe they would follow through with this, but I look at this page and I wonder is this a respectable organization? There's something clearly that's going on here. Now, maybe it's my fault. Maybe it's my browser or my internet connection or my computer that caused this. But to the end user, to the donor who's visiting your website, it does not matter where the mistake comes from. When they encounter a broken page like this, or a page where there's something wrong with it, that just decreases your trustworthiness, and it decreases their level of confidence that they're going to be safe. And unfortunately, that makes it a lot less likely that you're going to bring in a prospective donor or that you're going to get a donation from an existing donor. In 2019, we found that 8% of nonprofits link to donation forms that either don't exist or don't work. And in 2020, the number only went down by 1%. So 7% of nonprofits linked to donation forms that either didn't work or didn't exist. We also in 2019 did a study for activists, so environmental, political, social, etc. activists. And we found that 13% of organizations linked to donation forms that did not work. So let's just imagine that you work in development for your nonprofit, or that you're the executive director or whatever it is. How difficult would it be, either for you or for someone on your staff or a volunteer, to say, hey, just once a week, take 5 minutes, go to our website, click around for a few minutes, then click on one of the donate links, like the most prominent donate link, the one that's in the upper right for most organizations, or if you have it in your homepage hero, click on that one, the one in the footer, and just check and make sure that the experience looks okay. For 5 minutes once a week, you could save yourself a lot of heartache from potential donors going to your website and running into a problem, but then not completing. Because how many people do you think that it takes to run into a problem before someone finally calls or emails and says, hey, your donation page doesn't work or doesn't exist? And the next best step would be, if you can make a $5 donation once a week, once a month, or if you have lower minimums, you can make a $1 donation, whatever it is. Just check that your donation actually processes, because what we found in both 2019 and 2020 was that some of these nonprofits whose donation pages exist, we went through the process, we hit submit or pay or donate or whatever the button said, and they never charged our credit card. How many donors do you think that it takes to come to your website, see a donation form that looks like it works, hit the submit button, their credit card never gets charged, and then they actually have to notice that their credit card was not charged and then call you? Pretty much nobody is going to notice that. You might have one person a year, maybe, when you could have hundreds or thousands of people running into that problem. Well, if it just took 5 minutes a week for you to click through your website, and then once a month you actually make a donation, and hey, if you need to refund the donation, go ahead and refund it or whatever, that could save you a lot of heartache. Plus, this year, when I expect that retention is going to be difficult, if you can help yourself acquire more donors and also retain your existing donors by just doing a little bit of quality control on your end, it's going to help a lot. Going through the donation process, we found that 56% of nonprofits did offer monthly giving options. On the donation form, it was like, make a monthly gift or make it recurring or whatever. Interestingly enough, almost none of the organizations defaulted to monthly giving. There are some people who believe generally that your donation form should default to monthly giving. And I think that there are some good arguments on that side. Whether you should or not, it's hard to say. But in our case, almost none of the nonprofits, and I think it was just one, if I recall correctly, but one or two at the very least. It was a very small number. Unfortunately, while there are a lot of good arguments for defaulting to monthly giving, in our study, both last year and this year, there's little to no correlation between whether or not a nonprofit defaults to monthly giving and their annual revenue. So the more likely that it is, if a nonprofit defaults to monthly giving, unfortunately, it does not appear that it's resulting in more revenue. As far as legacy info and texting goes, the experience was essentially the same this year as it was last year. Only 2% of nonprofits offered legacy giving info, and only 2% offered texting. We this should pretty much explain why we only received 3 text messages during our entire study. I think if I recall correctly, one of the messages appeared to actually be a manual message, maybe not, but it looked like it was somebody in an office who was actually texting us to say thank you for making a donation. But otherwise, we only received 3 text messages, and there was only that one that was a text thank you for donating. So you searched for a nonprofit, you landed on their website, we talked through the website experience, you made a donation. Now let's talk about the follow-up experience. 96% of the nonprofits that we donated to sent an email the same day the donation was made. And all of those first emails that we received were a receipt, a thank you, or a welcome email. Those that did not send us a receipt, a thank you, or a welcome email sent no emails during our study. So how nice of an experience is that? You give a first-time donation to a nonprofit, and they don't even send you a thank you. Now, 66% of the nonprofits that we donated to sent one of these emails. I believe all of those were just receipts, but no substantial thank you or welcome information. 22% sent 2 emails. So in most cases, not all, in most cases, it was an automated receipt and then a thank you after that. 6% sent 3 emails, 4% sent 4 emails, and 2% sent 5 emails. There's a 0.38 correlation between an organization's size, between an organization's annual revenue, and the number of receipt, thank you, or welcome emails it sent. So generally, the more receipt, thank you, or welcome emails that you send, the more likely it is that your organization has a lot of annual revenue. And there's the correlation again is 0.38. Now, some of you have heard this from me before, but according to Tom Ahern, first-time donors who get a personal thank you within 48 hours are 4 times more likely to give a second gift. So it's great that 96% of nonprofits send an email the same day that a donation was made, but almost all of them are only sending a receipt. They're not sending a personal thank you message or anything substantial to really draw you into the experience. When we looked at all subsequent emails, so not those transactional sort of welcome emails, receipt emails, whatever else it is, 62% of organizations sent no emails after the welcomes, the receipts, etc. We have roughly 12% of organizations average 1 email per month. We had about 6% of organizations average 2 emails per month, and on up. Of all organizations that sent emails after the receipts and so on, the median number of emails per month was 3. According to data from Smart Insights, email generates $40 of income for every $1 spent on average. And then as well, according to the Aberdeen Group, the conversion rates for marketers that leverage content, or in other words, stories basically, is 88% higher than those that are not doing so. So basically, the more that you're leveraging content, using content in your emails, the more likely it is that you're going to have a high conversion rate. So while many organizations struggle not just to have enough budget, staff, or skills, it can also be difficult to collect, create, and disseminate stories. But if you can manage to do so, according to studies from the Aberdeen Group, you're likely to have higher conversion rates, and generally, the more emails that you send, the more likely it is that you have high revenue. I already referenced this study from Smart Insights, but you can see the return for every dollar spent on these other places: SEO, online banners, out of home, etc. We also looked at the direct mail. So 63% of organizations sent no direct mail. That's not super surprising, I suppose, because some organizations choose not to send direct mail to online donors, which I think is a mistake. But then also, we're giving donations of varying sizes, from large donations to small donations. And we found no correlation this year between the size of a donation that we gave and the speed at which we received direct mail, or whether or not we received direct mail. But the median number of days for us to receive a direct mail piece was 10. And interestingly, only one organization sent no email, not even a receipt, but they did send a direct mail piece, and they actually sent it quickly. That organization sent us a direct mail piece 10 days post-donation. I referenced earlier that we do release additional articles, studies, whatever else it is, for the insights that we gather later. I wrote this article on LinkedIn in, I think it was February of 2020, if I recall correctly. And at that time, we'd received 1,000 or 2,000 emails from our 2019 study, so that we had a little bit of an analysis. So you can check that out if you're interested. And otherwise, as I've referenced, you can go ahead and follow us or reach out to us if you would like to see any of the additional data that we have. Okay, we've searched, we visited the website, we made a donation, we received some of the follow-up communications. So now what was the social experience like? Because social media in many ways is important to nonprofits. We looked at the social channels linked to by nonprofits. So Facebook was linked to by 94 of the 100 nonprofit websites. Instagram was linked to by 74, LinkedIn by 23, and so on. The median number of social links from a nonprofit out to their social channels was 4. There was a 0.92 correlation between an organization's annual revenue and the number of social channels that it linked to. So generally, the more revenue that an organization has, the more likely it is it's going to link to more social channels. Now, we can look at this, coming in both directions, I suppose. You could theorize, and we could test for, well, does linking to, and then, of course, being active in more social channels in some way drive more revenue, or I suppose, does it work the other direction, where the more revenue that you have, the more likely it is that you're going to be active in more channels, because maybe you've made the most of Facebook, maybe you've made the most of Instagram, or whatever it is. And so now you have the budget or the staff or the agency time or whatever it is to be active in other channels, so you're more likely to link out. Whatever direction it goes, if there is even any influence, the correlation is 0.92. So it certainly would be worth looking into for your nonprofit. Might it be worth getting active in more social channels? And frankly, might it be worth getting active in some of the social channels where there aren't that many other organizations? I mean, LinkedIn, only 23 of the organizations linked to it. And LinkedIn is 1/10 the size of Facebook, and people are less active there. But if you're going to encounter less competition, maybe it's worth your time to be active there and not as active on Facebook or wherever else where you're going to be fighting for space in the newsfeed. We also, this year, again, worked with our friends at Actionsprout, which, if you're not using Actionsprout, it is a spectacular Facebook tool. It's great for data. It's great for a number of things, engagement. And if I recall correctly, I think it was just within the last few months that they made their tool free for 501c3s. So if you're not using it, I recommend checking it out. It's a great tool. We found with Actionsprout that 61% of nonprofits post less than once per day. 24% post at least once per day. 3% post more than 4 times per day. On average, a nonprofit's post will get 20 engagements per post. And then we also found high correlations between post frequency, number of people engaged, average numbers of emails sent per month, and revenue. So basically, the more that you post on Facebook, the more likely it is you have high revenue. Now, is there causation here? We can think about all of that and debate it and test it and so on. But again, the more often you post, generally, the more likely it is that your nonprofit has high revenue. The more people that are engaged by your post, the more likely it is you have high revenue. The more emails that you send per month, the more likely it is that you have high revenue. But also, the more number of emails that you send per month, the more likely it is that you post at a high frequency. The more likely it is that you're engaging people. There are correlations, high correlations between all of these things here. So generally, the more active you are on Facebook, it appears, the more likely it is that you have high revenue. So typically, I would recommend that you're active, but you have to balance that against other priorities, of course. We looked at the social media follower mix. So across the nonprofits, the 50%, 57% of the average nonprofit's follower base was on Facebook, 16% was on Instagram, 26% on Twitter, and so on. Just to give you an idea of some of the numbers here, the median number of YouTube followers, for reference, was just under 300. So that's, if that gives you an idea of roughly what 1% of the audience is, it's just under 300. There was a 0.81 correlation between an organization's annual revenue and the number of Facebook followers it has. So generally, the more Facebook followers you have, the higher your revenue is. Interestingly enough, though, the correlation between the number of followers that you have on Instagram and your revenue is 0.94. On Twitter, the number of followers you have on Twitter and your revenue, the correlation there is 0.96. On LinkedIn, it's 0.62. And on YouTube, it's only 0.11. So, does that mean that if you get a whole bunch of followers on Instagram that all of a sudden you're going to have more revenue? More than likely not. And generally, as I said earlier in the presentation, the more recognizable your brand is, the more likely that it is that you're going to be seen in the news feeds in social media, because Facebook knows, Instagram knows that if we prioritize things that people want to see, things that people recognize, then they're going to have a good experience. Well, unfortunately, if a competitor nonprofit has a recognizable brand and you don't have a recognizable brand, they're going to be seen more often. If they're seen more often, they're going to get more engagement. If they're getting more engagement, more than likely they have high revenue. Is the engagement causing high revenue? No, but it's not hurting. So what could you take away from this? Well, not only are followers important, of course, but building your brand and making yourself recognizable so that when LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, whatever shows you in the newsfeed that people do engage with you and they like, they comment, they share, and so on. Building a brand so that they do positively react is going to then, optimize the algorithm, so to speak, so that you show up more often. And if you're showing up more often, then when people receive your email, when they get your direct mail pieces and so on, they are much more likely to respond positively and be retained as a donor or to be acquired as a new donor. Interestingly enough, as far as Twitter goes, according to a roundup of giving statistics posted on nonprofitsource.com, Twitter users send 700% more visitors to donation pages on Giving Tuesday than on a typical day. So when you look at the mix here, and when we look at the fact that there's a 0.96 correlation between the number of followers that you have on Twitter and your annual revenue, and then you think about, well, how might I even use Twitter? Because Twitter is saturated with media, with personalities, with influencers, and so on. How do we break through? Well, according to nonprofitsource.com and the roundup that they've done of giving statistics from all different places, Twitter is going to send 700% more visitors to donation pages on Giving Tuesday than on any typical day. So it might be worthwhile, if Giving Tuesday has any value to your organization at all, to get active on Twitter so that come Giving Tuesday, you can really engage or activate your audience. This year, we also looked at social media advertising. We found that there is a 0.69 correlation between an organization's revenue and whether or not it runs LinkedIn ads. The correlation for Instagram is 0.28. The correlation for Facebook is 0.18. The correlation for LinkedIn being higher, so basically if you run ads on LinkedIn, more than likely you have high revenue. The reason that it's higher is more than likely because Facebook is a highly effective advertising channel for almost everything that I have done in my career. It tends to be cost effective. You can reach a lot of people and so on. I think as of this recording, there are like 2.3 billion users on Facebook. Almost everyone in the United States and Canada are on Facebook and so on. So as a result of that, there are also a lot of agencies and freelancers and in-house people who know how to run Facebook ads. Whether they run them well or not, we can debate that. But generally, if an organization is advertising online, they're probably advertising on Google and they're probably advertising on Facebook. So once an organization like Michael J. Fox is spending $100,000 a year or $500,000 a year or whatever, some large amount on Facebook, they're probably getting to the point where they're starting to feel like, maybe we've tapped out this audience and it's time to put every additional dollar into another channel. So it makes it more likely that Michael J. Fox Foundation is going to spend, let's say, $100,000 a year on Facebook, and they're going to spend $15,000 on LinkedIn. Well, while LinkedIn has 1/10 the audience of Facebook, and LinkedIn users do not log in to LinkedIn nearly as often as people log into Facebook or Instagram. Still, if you're encountering less competition there because less nonprofits have company pages there, less nonprofits are active on LinkedIn, less nonprofits are advertising on LinkedIn, might there be a space for your nonprofit to get more active on LinkedIn? And then even though it takes a while to get that marketing flywheel, that advertising flywheel, that engagement flywheel going, might it be worthwhile for you to invest there and carve out your niche so that when much bigger organizations like the Michael J. Fox Foundation, when they're spending their $15,000 on LinkedIn, well, if your entire budget for the year is $15,000, you can go potentially head to head with them, whereas you might not be able to compete with their budget that they're putting forth in Facebook. So all of this is to say that we have some data on advertising, and I would question whether or not you should be using the same channels that everyone else uses, because you might be able to fight the big boys, so to speak, in these other channels if you have a high quality and very deliberate strategy. I have done studies with my clients where we, for example, we sent only direct mail to our audiences, and then we also sent direct mail to 50% of their house list, and we advertised just to those households. And so in one study, I believe that this was 15 or 20 nonprofits across the United States over a 3-month period. Out of all the direct mail that we sent in a 3-month period, direct mail only, no email, no advertising, no nothing else, we had over that time frame a 24% response rate and an average gift of $59.47. When we sent the same direct mail pieces, same frequency, everything, to the other 50% of their house file, and we showed ads only to those households, we had a higher response rate. We had a 32.5% response rate, so we had a lift of 8.48%. We had a slightly lower average gift, which is not too surprising, because if you have people who weren't going to give in the first place, then they're likely to give a slightly lower gift when they do finally give. But just because of that lift in response and the additional gifts, the ROI that was added on top of direct mail only was 17.1. So for every additional dollar that we spent on advertising, we generated another $17 on top of the return that we were generating already. So I show this mostly because, some nonprofits don't advertise at all. Some nonprofits only advertise in the channels where they have the most competition, in Google and in Facebook. But you have a lot less competition in certain channels like Twitter and LinkedIn. But we also have studies that show that advertising, not just to your online audience, not just doing retargeting, but if you can sync up your online, offline data and advertise to your direct mail audience, whether these people choose to give online or whether they see the email and then they give a gift to their direct mail that you're sending them, it can have a significant impact on your ROI. So we're wrapping things up here. It's been a long presentation. Hopefully you stuck it out with me. Some of the key takeaways. So first and foremost, look at your website experience from the donor's perspective. How easy and obvious is it for them to take a desired action? Are you popping up pop-ups all over the place? If you think that the visitor is a current or prospective donor, are you showing them the ask? Are you auto-rotating things when maybe you should just keep things still and simple? Are you putting the first thing first? Make sure your donation pages exist and function. I mean, do you want to be one of those 7%, 8%, 13% of nonprofits and activists that have a donation page that doesn't exist or doesn't work, when you could just go and visit the donation page and make sure that it works, make sure that the experience makes sense? Consider your use of email and direct mail. Are you making the most of them? Now, I didn't say a lot about the creative this year for either of those because, frankly, it was boring. And again, I don't want to criticize the creative too much because I understand that sometimes it is the boring direct mail pieces that work the best, but nothing this year actually stood out. See last year's study and webinar if you're interested in some of the creative that stuck out to us last year. And then finally, consider your use of social media and advertising. I've hit it, over the head multiple times here, but I think it's definitely worthwhile thinking about where is it that you can build recognition, build your brand, and get people to engage with you so that you're optimizing the algorithm for you to show up more and get that higher engagement. Because generally, the organizations that post more and get more engagement have higher revenue. There's a lot of things to consider there. There's a lot of things to consider in general. If you have questions, I would be more than happy to answer questions. If I can point you in the right direction, even if we're not working with you or whatever, I am very happy to point you to somebody that can help, to Google something and send you a link or whatever you would like. You can call, you can text, you can email, you can visit the website. If you have follow-ups, please just let me know. I hope that you all have enjoyed this. I hope that Planet Philanthropy is treating you and has treated you well. And I hope that I will see you